Am I on? Test. Oh, yeah. It was so funny. Sheila sent a text to Karuna and I about speaking, and it was kind of funny. She says, from a scale of 1 to 10, how excited are you guys about speaking? And we both had a number. It wasn't exciting. It's like, who wants to speak after Nathan, right? Come on. I know, but I'm just saying, it's like, come on now. I gotta speak after Nathan. I don't want to do that. So anyway, this morning, Karuna and I had talked about, right after that, we went to lunch, and we kind of had a little powwow of what we wanted to speak about. And one of the things that God has been putting on my heart is spirit-led imagination versus fantasy. So we're going to talk about probably quite a bit about fantasy today. And we're going to talk a little bit about reality and imagination. And Karuna and I are going to just jump in between each other here. So what is reality? Reality is the world or the state of things as they actually exist, as opposed to an idealistic or notional, which is a theory or a suggestion of an idea of them. It's the state or quality of having existence or substance. It is what it is. That's a reality. It is what it is. You guys, I remember I had this friend, she had a little boy, and he was probably 5 at the time, 4, and he had a little brother, and his mom was saying, you can't fight your little brother, and this kid was, if you fight your little brother, you're going to get a spanking. And the little brother did something that he didn't like, and he popped him, pop, just popped him. And his mom said, I told you, if you do that, you're going to get a spanking. He said, it is what it is. I mean, this little boy counted the cost, and this little boy said, it is what it is, man. I'm just, the reality is, I didn't like what he did. I popped him, and you're going to pop me. Hey, it is what it is, So reality is what it is. It's in reality, guys, we have to face facts. In reality, I'm going to say that again, we have to face facts. Now, I realize that there are facts. We can count up facts, but I want you to know today that truth trumps facts, and truth is a person. But still, we have to face facts, okay? We are, in reality, we are forced to feel. You're not feeling so much at times in fantasy. But in reality, you're forced to feel. You're forced to deal. You're forced to deal with the situation, to look at it, to experience it, to deal with it. And you know how Sheila talked about dealing with grief, how she'll just let it come in, she'll sit there with it. It's not like she hangs out there all the time, but she'll just let it pass through. But she doesn't just act as if it's not happening. And that's reality. Dealing with the emotions as they come, and you're going to hear us say this more and more today. But you deal with them, you sit there, you be still, you sit with God, you see what he wants to show you about it, you let it come, you sit with it, and then you let it pass through. It releases that toxic, negative energy when you do that. Okay, now let's talk about imagination, or to frame. Imagination to me turns into vision. You got to see it before you see it. Does that make sense? You got to see it before you see it. The Hebrew word for frame, and you guys have heard me talk about framing your world. You take this frame, anytime we frame something, when you frame something at home, why do you frame it? Because you want to preserve it. Because it's something special to you. You put it behind glass because you want to protect it. And it depends on how expensive it is, right? What type of glass you put it behind. Do you go with the non-glare? Do you go with the preservative one? What do you go with? You don't go down to Walmart and buy a frame for something that's real precious for you, right? $1,000+ piece of art. So we put it up there, we frame it, we look at it, we admire it, and it's special to us. What do we do with some of our thoughts and some of the lies that we've believed. So the Hebrew word for frame is yester, and it means to form, it means framing, it means purpose, it means framework. It's to form as in pottery. Man was formed, that word formed from the dust is that same word. It also means imagination. And we have been talking a lot about imagination. Even in Beyond the Horizon, we've been focusing on Jesus. We would imagine and go places. It's holy imagination. It's anointed imagination. It's not just something that we make up like as in a fantasy. But when we're imagining, we're in this space with God, and we let him take our imagination. And some of us have a hard time with imagination because we were told as kids, stop living in that imagination. And I know for me, when we started doing meditation, I had to really deal with that because I had shut down my imagination. Now, there's a difference between imagination and fantasy, though. You have something? Okay. So Habakkuk 2:2-3 says, "Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision," that word vision is imagination, "and engrave it plainly on clay tablets, so that the one who reads it," I'm reading from the Amplified if y'all are trying to put it up there. Clay tablets, "so that the one who reads it will run." Verse 3, "For the vision is yet for the appointed future time. It hurries towards the goal of fulfillment, and it will not fail. Even though it delays, wait patiently for it, because it will certainly come. It will not delay." Psalms 103:14 in the NAS, New American Standard. Y'all get that up there. Psalms 103:14. "For he himself knows our frame. He is mindful that we are but dust." Go to Psalms 103:14 in the Passion Translation. I love this one. "Certainly my tongue does not frame a word." So guys, we frame words. We frame our lives. It says, "Certainly my tongue does not frame a word without you, O Lord, being thoroughly aware of it." Your imagination, your words frame your life. Darren taught us this. We've been talking about this for a long time, of what we think, the lies we believe, right? How they can frame our world. If you believe a lie about yourself, you restrict yourself. It's like those grave clothes that we were singing about earlier. And you put it up on the wall, you frame it, you look at it, and you said, this is what it is. You do that. Not Satan. You do that. And we have the power to break it. And I want to encourage you to break some of those things that you framed this morning, okay? So until we change our thinking, we're going to keep recycling our experiences over and over again. I'm going to say that again. Until we change our thinking, we're going to keep recycling our experiences over and over. So don't let your past experience, whether it's good or bad, keep you from the possibility of the potential of your present reality. We need to be in the present moment, guys. A lot of us live too much in the past. And we've seen these words and we've framed them up. And what happens, there's a trauma that comes, or there's a place of rejection or a place of abandonment or a place of whatever. And we frame that up and say, this is what this means. And this is who we are. And this is how this situation is always going to play out. We frame that up, and that's not truth. Remember last week, Nathan, I don't want to get ahead of myself. Nathan talked about the God we have on a rope. Y'all remember that during worship? Nathan talked about the God that we have on a rope. And I remember Kirby also talking about the God that we relate to. It's your God. You create your God. Not that it's the God, our Father, but it's you created. by your past experiences, your traumas, your hurts, your whatever. And when Nathan said that, what I saw, and I'm not calling God, hear me, I'm not calling God a dog, but what I saw is like a dog on a leash. And you know when you take your dog out to go for a walk, your dog is in front, so the dog really thinks it's leading, but the truth is you have that dog on a leash. And you're the one that's really deciding where you're going to go, how far you're going to go, how fast you're going to go. The dog may think that it's setting the pace, but you could always pull back on that leash and you control the dog. But the fantasy is that the dog thinks that it's leading. Even you decide where the dog is going to go smell and sniff and where the dog is going to pee, poop. You decide that. The dog thinks it is, but you could pull on that leash and make that dog go in a different direction. And guys, this is what we think that we can do with God. We think we have our little G God on a leash, and we're pulling him around, telling him where to go, what he can do, what he doesn't have permission to do. And that causes restriction. That causes us to stay stuck. Because we created that God. And I love what Jared would always say, that type of God, I'm atheist to that. God, we are atheists. We should be to that God that we created in our mind, to that Father that we compare to our own Father, and we created this God and say, you're not good all the time. You didn't come through here. You didn't do this. You didn't do it like I wanted you to, when I wanted you to, how I wanted you to. So I'm going to control it now because I can't trust you. I have to self-protect. I have to self-persevere. You understand me? And we get into a mode of controlling, and we get into a mode of framing that God up and saying that's what you are, and we keep him right there in that box, and it limits us. Not so much that it is limiting him in your life because you see him a certain way. It's the filters that you see him through. And this God is developed from a place of trauma many times. It comes from a place of disappointment, a place of frustration, and I would say a place of mistaken identity where we've compared him to our father or father figures or authority figures in our lives. It comes from a place of fantasy. It's what we've made up, right? It's what we've created. Most of us don't even have the framework for all the things that God wants to do in and through us. Because we've created a fantasy God. And I want today to be the day that we shatter that fantasy God. Because that stuff keeps us in grave clothes. That stuff keeps us bound. That stuff keeps us not in reality, but in a falsehood. And so let's talk about fantasy for a second here. Fantasy is the power or process of creating, especially unrealistic or implorable mental images, get this, in response to a psychological need. So we have a need, and we create a fantasy according to that need because it's comfortable, because it's a false sense of safety. It's an illusion. It's a delusion. You hear me? So fantasy, I'm going to read that again, is the power or process of creating especially unrealistic or implorable mental images in response to a psychological need. Fantasy begins as a psychological process by which a child learns to fill the gaps between knowledge, reality, and what they experience. It's a coping mechanism. It's a state of what could have been and what could be. It allows us to avoid hard work, and it allows us to avoid change. The reason why I even started thinking of this, guys, because God was showing me something. You know, have you ever had a fantasy about the one that got away? Or the job that you should have had? Or the money you should have made? You understand what I'm saying? Women, we are really bad at this. Men are too. But I know people think about the one that got away. And if you start comparing every man or woman that comes into your life to the one that got away that's in your head, no one can compare. Because of that fantasy, no one can compare to that fantasy. You guys, if I'm real honest, that's the reason why it is such a struggle in marriages when there's porn involved. Because you cannot compete ever. The spouse cannot compete with that fantasy in someone's head. It ain't real. It's made up. And when we make up a situation of how it's supposed to be, when it's supposed to be, and we have our little 1, 2, 3 ABCs about it, nothing can compare to that. And you end up missing what God has for you because you're living in a fantasy. Do you hear what I'm saying? You end up missing the very thing that's there to bless you, the very thing that you have need of, that you think you have need of. You end up missing it because of your fantasy. I thought about Leah. Leah is very interesting to me. Now, poor lady. She said, poor lady. Leah is very interesting to me. I've been studying Leah for a while. And one of the things that's interesting about Leah, Leah watched Rachel and Jacob's relationship for 7 years. And he decided, that's who I want to marry. Asked Laban for her hand. She watched it. It played out before her. Now, Leah wasn't that cute, y'all. She wasn't the pretty sister. She had funky eyes. There was some stuff going on with Leah. And some of us can relate to Leah. Leah has some issues. I know that ain't right. But I'm just saying, Leah had issues, and Leah watched her sister, who was beautiful, the Bible says. She watched this man dull over her. She watched this man make goo-goo eyes at her. She watched that relationship develop. And then here comes the wedding night, and he gets duped. Leah possibly lived in a fantasy. I would say that that's what really made her, maybe, possibly, this is just throwing it out there, okay with her dad doing a switcheroo. Because she wanted that kind of love. I think there was a fantasy in her mind about that kind of love that she saw displayed in front of her with her sister and Jacob. And so for that one night, she lived in a fantasy because he thought he was with Rachel. And then afterwards, when he woke up and saw this, versus the one that he loved, he was ticked. And she was crushed. And there was a fantasy there. And she said, maybe he'll love me if I give him this son. God saw that she was unloved, and God opened up her womb and gave her a son. And you could see by all the names that she named him, God cares, God hears, God sees. She finally got to the point where I think she came out of that fantasy, where she named Judah, Judah. Yet I will praise. In the midst of a person that doesn't love me, in a marriage that's no love, I will praise. She got to that point. But I'm saying, I believe Leah started off with fantasy. I can't say that's a fact. I'm just telling you my belief. You can believe it if you want. I'm just giving you, what if that was like that? Fantasy keeps you in a state of what could be. When you take the thing and you twist it, then it becomes fantasy. Fantasy comes usually from a real desire or a need. Let's say you need to lose weight. How many people have you said, I want to lose weight? People don't go to sleep and wake up small. I wish it was true. But it ain't. I know one person, not in Kirby's meetings, they lose weight. I'm like, can we happen here? Can I just skip and lose 10 pounds, at the end of the meeting? That'd be cool. People's pants be falling down in his meetings and stuff. That's awesome. But that's not the norm, guys. I'm saying it could happen. But a lot of people live in a fantasy about food. I know one real live person. God told her, he was going to do this thing in her life. And literally, he said, how much weight do you want to lose? And she was even afraid to say how much. She really wanted to lose 50, but she said 25. And she woke up 25 pounds lighter. It really happened. I know this one person. But that's not the norm. And so many of us are saying, I'm going to lose weight, or I'm going to have this house, and I'm going to do this. But you're not doing anything towards that. You're not setting any goals toward that. You're not eating properly. You're not exercising. It ain't going to just come off. Like, poof, gone. I wish, but it's not. We do that with our health. You know, I've seen people that have diabetes, and they eat any and everything that they want, then they shoot up with insulin and think that they're going to be healed. Sorry, you're not. Do you understand what I'm saying? They're living in a fantasy, and the fantasy has them trapped. We do that about money. And you can imagine all day long if you want to and call it forth, but sorry. There is mental rehearsal. There is a thing of mental rehearsal in science. Mental rehearsal, I think I shared this with you guys before, where they took these guys who had never ever played the piano. They took some people and they practiced on the piano every day, same chords every day. Then they took those that they just did it in their mind. They rehearsed it over and over and over and over every day. Then they took some that didn't rehearse at all. Well, when they came back, those that had played every day, yep, they had advanced in that musical instrument. And then the ones that just played it in their mind, had never sat at a piano before, they could sit down and they could play it because mental rehearsing works. The ones that did nothing, guess what? They got nothing. Same way with weight, same way with health, same way with everything else that we live in a fantasy about. Mental rehearsal works both ways. It's a twisted thing. Crazy thing is, it sometimes happens because of trauma, rejection, abuse, stuff like that, that causes us not to move forward and move out of fantasy. Do you understand that? Does that make sense to y'all? Am I making sense? Getting something out of this? Hope so. One of the biggies is the need to be loved. So you use, me, you, whoever, use our imagination to make something unrealistic come true, or we think it will come true, or we want it to come true, and we use it, just like I said earlier, how we measure up against the fantasies that's in our head. Do y'all remember the color purple? I think Miss Seeley was in fantasy. Miss Seeley was in fantasy, if y'all remember the color purple. She was abused by Albert, and Albert even brought his woman, Suge, in the house. And Suge looked at her and said, "Ooh, you sure is ugly." And she stayed and took that. That woman was in fantasy. And I say that as to be something funny, but the truth is there's a lot of women that are in abuse today, in abusive relationships, because they bought into a fantasy. The one that got away. The fantasy about the person that you're thinking about, and you think that they're thinking about you and what they think that they're thinking, and, oh, this could have been my way of provision, this could have been whatever. The truth is, he ain't with you because he ain't with you. She's not with you, and she ain't with you. She's not over there thinking about you. She done moved on. He done moved on. But you're still stuck because you had a fantasy in your head about him. And you're wondering what could have been, should have been, how it would have been. And you're dreaming about it and fantasizing about it. And it ain't ever going to come true, probably. And, you know, one of the things that God showed me, because I was kind of stuck a little bit about the one that got away. And then God started showing me, now, Monica, do you remember that relationship? Did you like this? And it's nothing against the person, hear me. Nothing against the person, it was just what I was doing with the thoughts, which was fantasy. Did you like that? No, God, I really didn't like that. Did he really get away? Did you like this situation? Remember when this happened? Did you really like that? So I had to sit with my thoughts, and I had to go through different things that was reality that really happened in the relationship, and then realize you had a fantasy about that. It felt good. It looked good. But guys, it wasn't God. I had to learn what I needed to learn through it, but then I had to move on. And sometimes we just got to move on. I remember my nephew when he was 6 years old, and he got in my car and he said, Amy, I love being 6. I just, woo! And he just carried on. He's drama kind of like me. I really love being 6. He said, but I like 7. Ooh, I like 7. Amy, I like 7. And I said, really? He said, mm-hmm. He said, you know, Amy, sometimes you just got to move on. And I'm just saying to you that there's situations that happen in our lives that we build a fantasy around that you need to let go and move on. You may have liked it at the time. It may have felt good at the time. You may have created a whole scenario around it. But I'm telling you that today is the day to let go of the fantasies and to move on. Do you hear me? And we could think of different situations, the job that I didn't get, that I thought I should have gotten, how I could have done it, and what it would have been like, and where I would have gone by now if I just woulda, coulda, shoulda. The woulda, coulda, shouldas keep you bound. The woulda, coulda, shouldas keep you from moving forward. And it's time to let them go and to move on. Okay? You have something to say? Isn't that? Keep going? All right, she's telling me to keep going. I'm going to keep going. You guys, I even remember, this is really crazy. There was a situation, this really happened. And see, what happens is God gets a bad rap from the fantasies that we create. And there was a woman in a ministry years ago, and this woman literally was fantasizing about the leader of that meeting, of that ministry. And this woman told her children, this is going to be your new father. This woman literally divorced her husband to be with that person. And that person had no feelings, nothing towards her. But she had a fantasy in her head she created. He felt safe. He looked like what she thought she wanted. And she started dreaming it up. She started doing the comparison. My husband doesn't treat me like this. My husband doesn't do that. She didn't even know him fully. When you see somebody up here, many times what you see up here, sometimes you're just excited about what you see. But you ain't at home with them. And you would hope they would be the same, but I'm still saying they put their pants on one leg at a time. Their poop stinks and their fart stinks just like yours. And you create this whole fantasy about them that they got to be this, that, or the other when they're not. Do you hear what I'm saying? And we do that about so many different things. And you know who got hurt in that? Her children. She destroyed her family. And her children thought, well, Mama said God said, why it's not? Had nothing to do with God. It was her fantasy. You guys, that's some crazy stuff. That's how affairs happen. Emotionally, physically, because you start fantasizing. What if? Well, he ain't giving me that kind of attention. She's not giving me that kind of attention. Look how much attention I'm getting over here. It's a trap, and it's a fantasy, and we get caught up in it. Women in abusive relationships, we believe that they're going to change. And sometimes what you have framed up is that you're not good enough, that you can't do it by yourself, that you won't have the money, fear of being alone. All of that goes into fantasy. And you frame it up, and you decide, and you end up staying in an abusive relationship that's not from God. Fantasies can be destructive. And there's all types of fantasies, guys. All types of fantasies. Very real question. How am I going to make it on my own? Who else is going to want me? All of that. That's real. But I'm still saying to you, don't get it twisted. If it's a fantasy, get out. Let the toxic relationship go. I know people who are in toxic relationships. And I know the questions, and I know the feelings, but that's in a fantasy. You've created a fantasy world, and it's not truth. And in some cases, women get killed over that. Men too. Children get hurt. So I'm just saying to us, wherever there is a fantasy in your life, look at where you've taken imagination and it's gotten perverted and it's gotten twisted. Be willing to look at it and to deal with it and get rid of it. Do you hear me? Do you understand what I'm saying? So why do we stay in fantasy? Because we don't like risk. It's comfortable. Mm-hmm. We don't like risking exposing ourselves, risking trying something new. We don't like shaking it up. We want to be comfortable, Dave. And what's the difference between anointed imagination and fantasy? Is that somewhere along the way our imagination got perverted. Those thoughts. 2 Corinthians 10:5 in the translation the Passion Translation. It says, we can demolish every deceptive fantasy that opposes God and break through every arrogant attitude that is raised up in defiance of the true knowledge of God. We capture, like prisoners of war, every thought and insist that it bow in obedience to the Anointed One. I love that particular scripture. The dark, twisted thoughts may come, but guys, we're the sheriff of the thoughts. And we need to arrest them. When the thoughts may come, my mama used to say that the thoughts may come, but like that bird, you don't have to let it build a nest in your house, in your head. And so I'm just saying to us, the thoughts may come and they may feel real. They may feel real. But we're the sheriff of those thoughts. And we can arrest those thoughts. And we can deal with what we framed up. We can take that frame off the wall, crash it to the ground, sweep it up and burn it so that it can never come back again. We are the ones that can control that because we created it and we can destroy it. Does that make sense? Y'all getting something out of this? You have something to say? No, you can say something and I can come back.
Okay. So one thing I wanted to, Xavier, can you put that image on the screen? So this is, Peter and I went to the Buffalo Bayou Cistern on Friday. And for those in Houston, it's a cool place. You should check it out. It's cheap. It's right near downtown. And if you've been, you know how unique it is. It used to be an actual working cistern here at Buffalo Bayou. Now it's just something you can tour. So if you look at this picture, when you look further, don't those pillars look huge? It looks like a giant place, right? Super tall. The depth, the pillars look ginormous. But if you can see that doorway, just the light reflection, the square in the middle, or the rectangle in the middle, do you see how there is a square on top of light and the square in yellow, and then the darker blue, and then the square of light and yellow again underneath it? It's an illusion. So actually, those pillars end, see the ones at the front? They end just 20 inches below where you see it at the front. And it's filled with water just up to 20 inches. An artist, there's a permanent art installation there, and the artist put this light, this blue light that reflects in the water and makes it look twice or even more its size Yeah, thank you, Xavier. So do you see where the darkness on the pillars are? That's actually almost the bottom of the pillar. It's just 20 inches below that. And it's just 20 inches of water. But when you see the reflection, it looks like double the size. It's amazing to see. But like Monica said, it's the illusion. The reality is not that. So how do we know? How do we discern the difference how do we know when we're in fantasy and when we're not? Xavier, do you mind putting up John 10? So John 10 says, 10:1, starting there, "Very truly I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate," and gate also can be translated as a portal or entrance, the door, "but climbs in by some other way," and climbing up is ascend or a rise, climbs in some other way is a thief and a robber. "The one who enters by the gate, the portal or the door, is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper or the watcher, or another translation is watcher or warden, the gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out." And voice can also be translated as a tone, an address, a saying, or language. "When he has brought all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice." And know is the word ginosko, which means an intimate knowing. It's union. It's like the knowing between a husband and a wife. It's a deep, intimate knowing. It's union. "But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice." Again, it's not union. Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore, Jesus said again, "Verily, truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved or made whole. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock. And the man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up again." Sorry, if you can skip maybe one more verse. Okay, sorry, I think I read it. I think I went too far. Actually, I wanted to get to that point, and I think we already read it, and I just blew past it, is when he says, I and my Father are one, and I am one with, so that's how you know it's union. And so, here, I just kind of drew this little diagram here. We've talked about the 99 and the 1. We're 99% spirit, really, just 1% form. 1% body, 1% mind or thoughts, and 99% is spirit. It's the mind of Christ. It's that place of union. And so I love what Monica is saying. So how do you tell the difference, between fantasy or what God is actually telling us? Because we know his voice. We are one with him. He and the Father are one. We're one with him. There's that confidence we have that we know his voice. So how do I tell whether it's my voice or his voice? And I just want to share a little quick thing that I experienced recently. And sorry, you want to go here. So I don't know if you can see this, but it's just a simple little diagram. I've had this image in my head for a couple weeks now, as I'm meditating and just experiencing more union with this than with my body. I mean, there's sometimes I can just feel the Spirit. I'm more really in tune with the Spirit going through and flowing through my body, and my body's almost like this thing that's within it. And that's actually the truth. That's the reality. We have become so attached to, like we've been talking about for months, like Sheila's been saying, the form, that we think this is who we actually are. Or our thoughts, we think this is who we actually are. But this is who we actually are. And the form is within this. This is eternal. It came to bring you the sheep. He said, I lead you out and lead you in. I love when you said the dog, because the truth is, we are following in that word in the Hebrew when it says, my sheep know my voice and follow me. It means to fall in step with. It means we're the ones following behind. It's just like the wind. You know, as the wind shifts, the gale force, there's not another part of the wind that comes from any other spot. Once the wind shifts, all the wind, every part of it shifts to a different direction. It's not you're standing here and you feel the wind coming up this way, and then all of a sudden you feel something come this way. No, it shifts together. And so just imagine that as the shepherd and the sheep. It's such union that as the shepherd turns, and you start moving that way. You start moving this way. And he says, I lead them out and I bring them in and out. It's freedom. That is the freedom. The restriction that we believed in that fantasy, we think, oh, no, I want to do my own thing because this is freedom. So how do you really know? The truth is, all of life, what is all of life? Is knowing him. Eternal life is knowing God, and knowing God is knowing myself. So if anything that I'm desiring can't last, if it's really temporal, then is it truth or fantasy? If it's really just focused on this thing and there's nothing eternal about it, then is that my own vain imagination, or is it what God's telling me? And I'll just share, I'll just share real quick one simple example from my life recently. So as most of you know, I'm an artist, but I also work in corporate. I have an HR job. And, for years now, my desire is to be able to quit my job forever and do art full time, And Peter's, that's what we both want. But so probably for the last year, 2 years maybe, every year I'm like, this is going to be my last year in corporate. This will be my last year, I would even, earlier this year, I would confess, this is my last year working a 40-hour work week job, just over and over. I'd say all those things, and I'm like, oh, I've got that desire going, and recently, so I don't know, as some of you know, some of you might not know, we're actually building a home, and we'll be moving sometime next year. And so I talked to my boss and said, I'll have to go fully, this is what we're going to be doing next year. Could I work fully remote? Because I'll need a fully remote job at that point. We're moving out of the city. And I said, and I enjoy working here. And so he said, well, let me find out. Found out, no, it's not going to be feasible at my current job. So I thought, okay, whatever. But in my mind, I'm thinking, well, that's a year from now. Maybe by that time, I won't need to work anymore. I'll be doing my art full time. And so Peter recently, and because of this, we know in HR, they're calling it the Great Resignation. So many people are switching jobs right now all over. It's crazy. And so I work in HR, but I do a kind of specialty thing in HR, in compensation. So I've been getting emails from recruiters like for months. And every time they send me an email about an opening, I ask them, well, I'm only open to fully remote right now. And so a recruiter contacted me a couple weeks ago, and I said, is it fully remote? They said, yes. I said, oh. But then I looked at the job description, and it's executive compensation, which is a specialty that I used to do years ago, but it's incredibly detailed. It's very high profile because you're working with all this executive data. You're doing the proxy filing for the SEC, all this stuff. And it was really stressful. It was, after doing that, I went back into general compensation. And I thought, oh, I never want to go back to that. That's too much. And just like the, excuse me, the fear of failure and just other things were coming up in me. I don't want to go revisit that. But one day I came home and Peter said, and we just kind of prayed together and were listening. And he said, I feel like corporate's not done for you yet. I feel like you'll be influencing influencers. Things will happen very fast. And I think he said one other thing. And it ticked me off. It really ticked me off. That night, I was so angry, I could barely sleep. And I was thinking, should I wake him up? I mean, I was ready to fight, He always says my wife is spicy. It's that curry spice that was rising up in me. And I'm like, he just wants me to worry, But thank God I have learned to, even though I get in to be aware enough of, is this me or is this real? Yeah. And so, a lot of times I don't dump it on him right then. I sit with it, just like we were talking about. Just like Alex and Sheila have mentioned, I sit with it. I let the emotion out. And as I'm sitting there, I'm just letting it go and feeling all this and getting it out. So, I finally went to sleep. The next day, I was still a little whatever about it, not quite. I think 2 days later, I finally shared it with him and the emotion was out. But at that point, it was really interesting because I had 2 interviews. Actually, he said, you'll have a choice. There was another opportunity as well that I initially thought, oh, this is it, but there were things that just really wouldn't have worked for us in that other opportunity. So I had the initial call with the recruiter. She set up an initial interview. About a week later, I had a Zoom call with the guy who will be my boss and his boss. It's supposed to be a 1-hour Zoom call. It went 2. And one of the things he said to me, Peter said, was, you'll be able to be fully yourself in this role. And, that was part of my fantasy. My model that I built was corporate. I don't want to work in corporate. I don't want to be working for the man. I want my freedom. I want to, do my own thing. I want to be an artist. I want to be free. And so I don't want to play this corporate persona. And I don't. Like I used to in that. And so I was kind of having the memory of what I used to strive for. Right. But God said, you're not the same person anymore. Right. So just be who you are. You're going back. I'm taking you back to a situation where you were someone else, but now fully you. Yeah. And one of the things he said to me, Peter said, is, corporate is not done for you yet. And so, I was thinking about that this morning. Why is it corporate's not done for you? It's not, you're not done with corporate. There is something in it for me. Yeah. It is for me. So when we get caught up in fantasy is when we want our desire so much. Yeah. And God showed me, he's like, really, what does it matter if you spend your time or your livelihood in corporate? I mean, I'll still paint, of course, and I'm still got my business. They'll still be part of it. Or if you're paint, like if your art business is like where you're making your money and spending your time, does either one matter? Because again, what is the whole purpose of life? It is to know him and it is to know me.
Yeah.
So why do the details matter? We get caught up and attached to the temporal.
Yeah.
And that's what leads us astray.
Yeah.
That's that dog we're the dog, and we don't even realize it. And the chain is what we have put around ourselves.
Right.
When the shepherd is saying, I will lead you, and it's all for freedom.
Yeah.
So you're going back to what you knew, but totally different. It's for your freedom, and it's for theirs too. So you're not playing a persona in that place, and then that place is not changed at all because you're fake. You're playing the part. You know, I had this Zoom call. It lasted 2 hours instead of 1 because we got along so well. I mentioned to them I'm an artist. They know we're moving all this stuff. Then they called me back 2 days later to have a face-to-face with the head of HR and the CEO, because it's executive comp, so I'll be working with him a lot. So they said it's a meet and greet with him. It'll be real quick. And before those meetings, the Lord said, remember who you are. Every encounter you have, remember it's from this place of union. Yeah. And when you're one with me, there is nothing to fear with anyone else. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Because it doesn't matter the title, it doesn't matter anything. When you're one with him, you are one with everyone, and you can see beyond you can discern their persona too, and see beyond the temporal to see the real. Yeah. And in that place, just like Christ, you can connect with everyone in that place of their need. And sometimes it means saying things that, he knew what each person needed, even if it was what they didn't want to hear. Yeah. You know, it was the stench of death to some, it was the aroma of life to others. So anyway, I sat with the CEO, what was supposed to be a 15-minute conversation. He talked to me for over an hour, and he just went on. I was just listening to him and his story. At the end, my boss walked me down to the lobby, who will be my boss in a couple weeks, walked me down to the lobby, and he said, Karuna, the thing that really sold me on you was when you told me you're an artist. And I was like, really? He said, yes, because I want someone who thinks outside the box. Yeah. I want a creative thinker. I don't want someone who's just, we need something different here. Yeah. So I was like, okay. And so when we start realizing, so how do you tell again the difference is, what is it about? Is God showing us something that he wants us? And it could have been, okay, I want you to focus 100% on art, but even the art is not for me. It is not to satisfy some desire in me. It's to know him and to know myself. And that is life. Yeah. That is it. So it's learning to see beyond what we have narrowly boxed in as our need.
And the one thing that Karuna could have chose to do is to say, I don't want to do that. Because she had done it before. So she had a framework for it. She had it framed up, and she knew what it was going to look like and how it was going to be. But the truth is, God was saying, you're different. So crash the frame. And then God blessed her beyond what she could have thought or imagined, because she was willing to let go of the frame. And that's what I'm saying. The frame can restrict us. If we let go of the frame and understand our union, as she said, then nothing is impossible with God. Nothing. You have something else? No, it's on. He's just got to.
Okay, thank you. One other thing I just wanted to mention real quick is, Romans 7. And so many of us understand that. That's Paul's, when he understands the old and the new covenant. And we're under a new one. And we know this, but, and he says in Romans 7, and that's okay, Xavier. I think it says in maybe 6 or so, verse 6, where it says, there's another law working in our members. I know the law of the liberty of, of Christ, but there's another law still at work in my members. And, you know, we all know we're not under the old, we're in the new, but the truth is, there is still, we haven't fully awakened. Our members are still sometimes, and it sounds like a voice, you know? So it's where, how do we hear and tell the difference is because even though there is one voice, it's his voice in us. Our thoughts have a voice. Our members have a voice.
Right.
And it has that sound. So there is still those things at work in us, but the recognition is, okay, what is it feeding? Will it last? Will it not? Because anything that is not eternal will die. Yeah. You know, it's not going to last. So, you know,
I'm sorry. Okay. We're talking about who's going to say something next. Okay. So your imagination is either working for you or against you. It's either bringing you towards God or away from God. Fantasy is fueled by the flesh, guys. You can always tell it. It's fueled by the flesh. And anytime you start doing stuff that God is nowhere in, your flesh is empowering that thing. And you can see it, you know it, you can experience it. You know it, you can discern. You're in God, you can discern. But what we like to do is to be comfortable. And we don't like it. Fantasy is fueled by the flesh, not anointed imagination. So if it's not giving or glorifying God, it could be a fantasy. If it doesn't produce the fruits of the Spirit, it might be a fantasy. If it's birthed in deception, it's probably fantasy. If it's selfish and it's all about you, it's likely a fantasy. Why do we live in a place of fantasy? Because reality can hurt. A lot of people do it because reality can hurt. Truth is, reality is all around us. It is filled with all of the emotions that we don't want to feel from our past. Remember, Alex talked about how she looked in the mirror and she had to deal with things and she really had to sit there with it, with that emotion and allow it to go through her and come out. We don't like to do that process. We like to escape and keep it moving because it hurts. It's uncomfortable. We want to self-protect, right? We don't want to feel the pain and the emotions from our past. You suffer some type of trauma in your past that you haven't dealt with. That's why we live in fantasy. Or you're in an unhappy job. You can be in a fantasy. Some psychological studies show that whatever it may be for you, the fact that you're retreating to fantasy is simply because the current reality that you are experiencing is too painful for you. And that happens. It's too painful. I don't like it. It's uncomfortable. It's risk involved. And I've been comfortable right here. I know this crazy, but I don't know what it's going to be like over there. Do you understand what I'm saying? I know you're crazy. I can handle that. I've learned how to maneuver and navigate my way through that crazy. And so I stay right there, and you're staying in fantasy. That's what keeps us anchored there. And the only way to move past these blocks in your life is to stop, just like what Alex was talking about, to take a good look at it, accept the present moment, and allow the feeling, move through it, and move on. Allow it to move and pass through you. You guys, I heard a story, and it was really interesting because we have these trapped emotions, we have this trapped energy, and it not only affects our mind, but it also affects our body. Do you understand what I'm saying? There was this young man, his father and his family owned a pig farm. And I just heard this story, so if I get it wrong, I'm sorry to the person that told me. But anyway, this young man worked on a pig farm. Their family had a pig farm. They had a farm, period, but they had a pig farm. And he did something wrong, and the dad hit him, and he fell face down in all that yuck. Now, If you work on a farm like that, you probably fell in the muck before. But it was the fact that his father hit him. And what happened, he fell in his face and fell in his eye, like this side of his face. And when that happened, that young man created a frame. My dad's not pleased with me. My dad's not happy with me. I can't do it right. I'm not enough. All of the lies. And so years later, this young man goes to a counselor, and he's getting he's getting counsel, but she's in ministry too, so it's kind of like he's getting ministry. And she begins to deal with that, and literally out of his eye starts seeping some of that stuff. It was pent up energy. It was pent up hurt that literally it probably affected the way he saw. Hear that in the spiritual. When we have that pent up emotion and we have those pent up things that we don't want to deal with, it affects how you see, the filters that you see through, what you imagine in fantasy, the imagination that's perverted. Not the right imagination, but the perverted imagination. And that stuff needs to come out, guys, so that we can see properly. We do that with people. We get hurt by people, and then we see them through a filter, and we see everybody through that filter. And you accuse me of something that somebody else did. I ain't had nothing to do with that. I wasn't there. But you're living in a place of fantasy, and therefore you're transposing that onto some other people. And people don't move forward and stuff like that. Do you understand what I'm saying? So I want to show you a quick little diagram here. I'm going to try to get this right. It's kind of funny. This is where you need a different kind of mic. I know I ain't that weak. Yeah, Karuna. Okay, so this is us. So we're going to say reality versus fantasy. And then here you have us. Well, we look better than that, I hope. Okay, this is us. And so here we are, we're living our life, and then the it's happened. Y'all know how the it's can come. I've talked to y'all about that. It's are going to come in our lives, and the it's happen. Huh? It's a picture of Dave. No, it's not. It's happened. And it could be experiences. Okay, y'all know what I'm trying to say. That create emotions. Okay? So the it's happened, and the it's are these experiences that create emotions. And when that happened, we get upset. And so then what we do is we build a wall. Because we want to self-protect, and we want to preserve ourselves, So we build this wall of all, I'm not going to let that happen to me again. Ain't nobody going to talk to me like that, blah, 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 blah. Whatever it's that happen, these experiences that try to come and hit us, here we go, nope, putting up a wall. You can't go past this. I'm going to protect myself. I'm going to protect myself from you. I'm going to protect myself from situations. And now we refuse to look at what happens from this, because when you have this, what we do is we create baggage. Because we reject this stuff. We say, nope, I reject it. I don't want it. I refuse to see it. I refuse to really accept it. What happened? I refuse to look at it and deal with it. And so we reject it, and when we reject it, we get these baggage around all this. This is the baggage. Right here. We get this baggage, and then we decide, this baggage comes from we make judgments, we make decisions from it, and we decide we don't like it. We decide we don't like you. We're not going to get in that situation again, that type of job, because I didn't like it. I got hurt, or it was too much work. I didn't like my boss. I don't want to work in corporate. Whatever it is, we reject it, and we build up this baggage. And in that situation, guys, we do things to survive. Like we might become successful in another area. But a lot of times in this success, it's all about us. It's all about performance. It's all about a selfish need to survive. Does that make sense? And when we do that, get into that place, we have framed up wrong things, and we still have not dealt with our feelings. And there's pent-up emotions, and there's pent-up experiences and pain that need to leave the body, just like the boy that was in that pig farm. And then we start having gaps. I don't know what happened to the eraser. But when we build this baggage, we begin to have gaps in our life because there's unhealed things. I did it. That's good. Because there's so many unhealed things. And we get stuck right here in the baggage, in the emotions, in the what happens, the what ifs, the fantasy, all of that. When God is saying to us, sit with it, allow it to come, deal with it, and get rid of the baggage where the true freedom is. You get rid of this. You did have that eraser. Yeah. You sit with it and you be with it. The wall begins to come down. Right? Because there's no need for self-protection anymore. The baggage comes away. And guess what? You could even change the experience. You could see God in the midst of what happened, and the whole experience changes. The whole emotions around it change. The baggage leaves, the wall comes, and you see that God was in it the whole time. And he was protecting you. And now you don't have to perform. You just get to be. You get to be who you always were right here in him. And that's where we want to get. That's where we want to stay. Because this is a place of creativity. You are a creator. You create. So you're either going to create the negative, the fantasy, or you're going to live in, we say reality, but truth, right? Because if I create it, I have to hold it up. I have to build it. I have to keep it going. But if God builds it, he watches over his word to perform it. You are a word, from the word. And he watches over his word, you, to perform it. I don't have to work it up. I don't have to build it up. I can just live in freedom in him and co-create with him. And that's where we want to be, guys. We want to let go of the fantasies and want to live in the present moment. Allow the thoughts to come, guys. Because it really does, science say, create brain damage when you don't, when you try to go, oh, I'm fine. It's okay. It's all right. It didn't really affect me that much. That creates neural pathways in your brain, and it creates literally brain damage. That's kind of, you don't want that, right? You want to sit with it, allow it to come, be still. Know he's God. Know he's got you. Allow him to show you what he wants to show you. Deal with it. Get rid of the baggage. Get healed from this place of safety. Because you're always safe, because you're always in him. So there's no need to fear, because the fear can cause us to get into fantasy. and not want us to deal with it. So there's no need to fear. You stay in him, you stay in peace, and you get your freedom. Amen? Okay. Jesse, you have something else to share? Why don't you, Oh, thanks. Jesse, why don't you close us out in prayer? So, guys, let's frame up what Father says about you and create with him and walk in his truth. Because there is nothing missing and nothing lacking in him, which means there's nothing missing and nothing lacking in you.
Papa, we thank you for this amazing day. Thank you for your word. Thank you for Monica and Karuna and what they brought forth today. God, help us to understand it. Help us to experience it. Help us to walk in the fullness of your vision for us, God. I pray over this week that you'd help us see where we've lived in fantasy, and God, bring us into your reality, because that's where we want to live, Father, so that we can know you and make your kingdom known in this earth. We love you. God's house, have a great day.
Parents, come see me.
Go Astros!
Yes. Go